He has gotten his freedom. Deputy President Jeffrey Rigathi Gachagua is a free man after corruption charges leveled against him during his time as Madeira Member of Parliament were dropped. So, freedom is in the air and the quality of the air is up for some assessment. Then there is the astonishing switch from freedom to fear, from street corners to estate lanes. Fear reigns as the country experiences an unprecedented wave of criminal activity. Kenyans are asking why. And questions have suddenly sprouted literally from nowhere about just how long a person can be president in Kenya. The Constitution sets it at a maximum of 2 terms of 5 years each. But a first-time Member of Parliament feels that should be reviewed. What do you think? And what about the deployment of the Kenya Defence Forces, KDF, to the Congo? That and more on Newsgang tonight. My takes on that cabinet talk that seems to overshoot the runway too often. Gachua's punchline punches holes in Kenya's process of selecting representatives, or are they, to the East African Parliament in Arusha. And the kicker kicks hard for all the good members of our disciplined forces, lest we forget their sacrifices. The Newsgang gets to duty right now.
The DPP acted contrary to Article 157 in its entirety. One cannot prefer charges in anticipation of evidence, since plea taking is not a simple thing. It leads to denial of liberty, public ridicule, many a time stress, which might even lead to unnecessary loss of life. I know of people who have divorced.
So, Njoki Shege is our sign language interpreter tonight. Gentlemen, thank you. It seems a second week in a row we're talking about the criminal justice system. Much focus, is there. And this is sort of picking up from where we left off last week, Linus. Now, finally, freedom is here for Rigathi Gachagua, but quite the stinging indictment for the DPP and the DCI by the senior principal magistrate.
That's exactly what has happened today. What has happened is Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua is free, but DPP Nurdin Haji has been indicted. When Magistrate Victor Wakomile speaks specifically of Article 157 of the Constitution, an article that was so laboriously fought for by Kenyans, because, like we discussed last week, if there is anything, one of the few things that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 really tried to do, it was to try and get the country to be run by independent institutions. And 157 really allows the Director of Public Prosecution to be independent. He can't take directives from anybody. And here is Victor Wakomile, the senior principal magistrate, saying that the DPP acted contrary to 157. Mm-hmm. Then obviously the question becomes, if you act contrary to 157, what next? If you're not able to act in accordance with the Constitution, how will you execute that office?
Or if you violate the Constitution.
Absolutely. So today is a bad day for the Director of Public Prosecution, because this is a very heavy indictment. It tells him that you did not do your job and you had no reason not to do your job. Because in the old Constitution, somebody can even claim, well, it was political pressure. What could I have done? But under the current Constitution, he serves for 8 years. One single term of 8 years. He's got job security. Nobody can fire him. So why was he taking instructions? Like he said, he was pressured by the DCI through the media to charge Rigathi Gachagua. This is a very, very bad day for DPP. But I think I wanted to just mention Victor Wakomile, the senior principal magistrate, for, in a very difficult day, standing to still protect the integrity of the judiciary. His wordings were very careful. he seemed to acknowledge the awkwardness of the situation. And even the awkwardness, the actions by the Director of Public Prosecution also presented to the accused. I think at some point he said that, you know, we are listening to a case, taking notes, when you are still fishing out for evidence. For evidence. It was such a serious indictment of the Directorate of Criminal Investigation that you can't work that way. And then also, Principal Magistrate Wakomile also closed it in a good way by saying, you know, you could still be charged for the same or related charges. So in a way, Wakomile today, that magistrate really stands out as the hero of the judiciary, because this is a nasty, this is a very ugly moment for the criminal justice system. Because look at what we are talking about. We're talking about a case being taken to court, but there was no evidence. Somebody was still looking for evidence. How odd is that? So what are we saying about the rest of the cases? What are we even saying about the people that continue to be arrested on a daily basis? DPP, do you have evidence, or you are using the courtroom as a holding area? You can't do that. You are supposed to take people to court. Once they take the charge, it's because you have the evidence. And remember, one of the things that really made this weak was at some point the Rigathi defense was asking for evidence, because you have to provide that this is your material evidence, this is your documented evidence. So that they can
provide an adequate defense. So
that they can defend themselves. DCI and DPP could not produce it. And I think the judiciary should follow, really, Victor Wakomile and the rest of the judiciary should follow the line and read the Riot Act to the other players in the criminal justice system. That, you know, you can't use the courtroom as a waiting area for you to, you know, keep suspects there, charge them, and somehow go out there and look for evidence. It's untidy, it's an abuse of processes, and ultimately it really undermines the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and you know, we'll talk about the politics around it in just a moment, but you know, the magistrate also said two interesting things today about introducing personal, prosecutorial and investigative liability, which would be perhaps putting, you know, responsibility on the individuals, not just, you know, the office of the DPP or the office of the DCI, but on the individuals that hold those offices to say, if you violate the Constitution or do not do your job according to the provisions of the same, that they should perhaps be held personally responsible. And then also introduced perhaps something else, like having a pre-trial conference where you sort of gauge the, you know, threshold of evidence, and if that exists before moving towards taking plea, for instance. And those are some of the interesting things, including, you know, judges playing a more, you know, questioning role. I think we said earlier, like what we see in the Supreme Court, like actively questioning. Yes, taking a more inquisitory role. But then, Francis, at the heart of all of this was the fact that, you know, these charges were politically motivated, instigated, and inspired. You know, so where does that leave us? Because this is both, there's the legal, that's one thing, but then here is politics again.
And the politics of then must be put in context with the politics of now. Was there any expectation, for example, that in his privileged position as deputy president, that we would possibly see the deputy president now following his case in courtroom, answering to these charges? Highly unlikely. In the event that he had lost in the presidential race, would the case have continued? Most likely it would have continued. So we must speak about the politics of the pre-election and the politics of the post-election. Now, this is how I look at it. When we say freedom is here, whose freedom? What type of freedom? Where is the freedom for the administration of justice? Because that is the fundamental freedom that we should be talking about. Freedom in the sense that if somebody is arraigned in court, then there must be enough evidence to prosecute that person. And it is not, one, guesswork. Two, it is not based on some gentleman's agreement between the DCI and the DPP, like, okay, let's take this guy to court, let him face charges as we look for evidence.
And it's not for media cameras.
And it's not for media cameras. Then if freedom is here, then it should be freedom for everyone, especially those who have been taken to court and charged without enough evidence having been gathered to sustain such a prosecution, number one. Number two, then we should ask ourselves, what were the reasons for the prosecution? Was there, for example, theft of public resources? If there was, then where is the freedom for the question of accountability and prudent management of resources?
Because I was going to ask Francis,
yeah.
So what happened to the substance of the case was that there were some dialysis machines that were supposed to have been delivered, right? You know, when he was Member of Parliament for Madeira. So was there fraud or wasn't there? And were the people of Madeira or wherever he was it Nyeri County, were they shortchanged or was there nothing to begin with? And those are some of the questions to ask.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm saying we must look at this freedom that we say is here across board. It must not be freedom for the deputy president. It must also be freedom for the administration of justice. If he was taken to court wrongly for political reasons, then truly his freedom is here. If the DPP and the DCI connived to prosecute somebody who had no case to answer or who should not have been taken to court in the first place, then freedom for the administration of justice then ought to be here first. However, remember, at the heart of it is a question of misuse of public resources. I mean, these are taxpayers' money.
If it happens, because now we're not even sure anymore with everything that's...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if, for example, Kenyan people paid taxes and those taxes were meant to do something, there's somebody who lost a life because a dialysis machine was not available. There's somebody who lost a life because this equipment or that equipment did not get into the right place. So we must look at it broadly. If there was no reason to charge the then Member of Parliament for Madeira, now Deputy President, then it is a good thing for him that finally he's free. And you heard what the magistrate was talking about. There are people who have had their names mischaracterized. There are people who have undergone stress because they were taken to court for something they didn't do. So when such a thing happens and they are acquitted like we have, or the charges are withdrawn like we have seen today, it's a good thing. It's freedom for them. But I think it opens a discussion, an opportunity for a bigger discussion. That bigger discussion being when George Kinoti, the former DCI, and the current DPP, Nurdin Haji, when they started the bromance, the Kamata Fridays, the heavy prosecution that we saw and the dramatic arrest that we saw, all those people who were arrested, was there any reason to arrest them in the first place? Number two, are we going to see a scenario where almost all those people who were arrested during the Kinoti, DPP, Nurdin Haji dispensation, are we going to see a series of applications to withdraw their charges? If there will be, and they are actually allowed to withdraw those charges, then what does it say about administration of justice? What does it say about, let's say, the county resources that we saw governors being accused of mismanaging? Yeah. What happens? So it's a whole discussion, and it's unfortunate that, once again, politics is getting the better of administration of justice. And,
Aisha Juma as well, in the murder case that she's a part of, there was a time, just after the new administration came in, there was talk that she would be state witness against the other individual she's been charged with. And then now we've heard that, she's also applying for withdrawal of charges as well. And like you say, it now casts doubt upon all cases. And anybody will also want their day of freedom because, you stain with one and the whole water is now, the pool is muddied.
But I also wonder one more thing before Linus comes in.
Yeah.
We are talking about the high-profile political players.
Yeah.
The DP, the Minister for Public Service. What about that person who has no political name? What about that person who has no political influence, who was taken to court using the same arrangement between DPP and DCI? You take this person to court for this charge as we look for more evidence. What happens to such people who are in remand, who probably could not raise bail to get their freedom? So it's a very mixed up situation, in my opinion.
Yeah. Linus?
Yeah, I was just also joining Francis in expressing concern about the cloud of politics over the administration of justice in the country. Because that is how it's looking like right now, that, the Aisha Juma case will collapse, you know, because she is cabinet secretary. She was interviewed anyway with the charges hanging over her head. So there's obviously the interpretation by the public that, you know, some of these cases will go nowhere just on the basis of politics, because those who have been charged are actually in politics. And politicians have not been helping matters either. You saw recently, for example, Raila Odinga calling for Waluke's case to be dropped.
Yeah. Edwin Sifuna said he is, was to the effect, I think on the breakfast show, was it yesterday, that he's a depressed man in jail. He's a broken man, I think, yeah, those are the words that he used.
Yes, so
and that if DP Gachagua is going to be let off the hook, then so should he, despite the fact that Waluke has been convicted.
Open the jails for everybody.
Yeah.
All of them are depressed.
Right?
They're broken.
I doubt that anybody's happy to be in prison.
So for politicians, it looks like this is an exchange of hostages now. That, okay, give us Gachagua, we'll give you Waluke. And this is really, really ugly for the justice system. Because when you look at the charges that some of these people are being charged with, huge amounts of monies are involved. Is it 7.4 billion for Rigathi Gachagua? So is the court and the DPP and DCI, are they telling us this was fiction? Are they telling us that the supply of dialysis machines at 6 million shillings to the county of Nyeri in 2014 was fiction? Are they telling us, you know, the money is paid out by the county government of Bungoma was also fiction? Are they saying that some of the facts that have been presented and are in the public limelight were all fiction? This is serious, because it just goes to the question of, are we really serious about fighting corruption? Remember, the numbers out there is that we spend about 800 billion, 900 billion.
Yeah,
we lose
that,
800 billion to corruption. Now, for the new administration, this is a word they have not been very eager to pronounce, corruption, graft, except pronounce it in terms of political persecution, which is something else. Because when you look at what the EACC has been doing for the last few weeks, you know, reports of a senior or junior officer in a ministry. Was it last week we had a KRA one that had millions in their accounts? Yeah. So this is not fiction. Corruption is real. It is the reason so many people are moving into politics, because they think now you go to politics and you become the supplier of all dialysis machines for all the county governments. Oh, you're bringing in CBC. Oh, I'll supply all the books because you have political connection. Now, here is why we should be sad tonight. We should be sad tonight because a magistrate has pronounced that the DPP failed to exercise his role as per and mandate as per Article 157. You know, it's only through an independent prosecutorial authority that we can actually fight corruption. Will we, for example, go the lengths of South Africa, where they have taken Jacob Zuma to jail, former president, not taking him to jail, and not in a very easy circumstance, because you remember his supporters were doing what Kenyan supporters would do, you know, barricade the home
the roads and
the criminal justice system in South Africa said, no.
You demonstrate.
Yeah, you demonstrate, but at the end of the day...
And he did serve his term, right? Yeah, although he was let off early, but he served his term.
Yes, he did. So we are really, really far. And if you ask me where the problem is, I think I said it last week, it's just about the people that people those officers. I was very disappointed to see the DPP saying, oh, now there'll be goodwill of the executive. What goodwill do you need as a director of public prosecution? Why do you need goodwill from State House? Goodwill to do what? Because goodwill also means they can ask for favors. Like, okay, can you drop that one for me, please? So that you get my goodwill. So if the DPP is shopping for goodwill, instead of reading Article 157 of the Constitution, then we are in trouble. We are in deep trouble, especially in an environment where crime is also, skyrocketing. But I don't think they meet the threshold of what can be dropped. So the knife guys will always be...
Yeah, and you know...
12, 13 years ago,
yeah.
I remember when the discussion was very heavy about the making of a new constitution and the repealing of an old constitution. I remember following those discussions very closely, including that long period in Naivasha, where the parliamentary committee that was then chaired by co-chaired by Ababu Namwamba and Abdikadir Mohammed. The discussion then, I remember, coming from the committee of experts, then chaired by Professor Nzamba Kitonga.
Yes, that's right.
Remember that team?
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the discussions that I kept hearing them talk about was independence of institutions.
Institutions.
And it was to depart from the Moi era kind of institutions to independent institutions that, one, will not be bullied by the executive, number two, that will not be harassed by anyone, number three, that will only do the right thing without having to look behind,
left, right.
Left, right, and center, and wonder what will happen. And that is the principal reason why, for example, the office of DPP was made independent, such that not even the president can sack the DPP. And for a continuous period of
8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
Do you think...
And security of tenure. In case he loses his job in that period, they will have to pay him his dues.
Do your thing in 8 years and do it so well, and then without having to think about re-election, reappointment or anything. Do your thing in 8 years, exit. I'm surprised that
here we
have an independent office in the Constitution on paper, but practically the talk does not sound independent.
Because, Francis, I spoke of the person. You see, executing an office also requires character, value system, courage, for example. Especially courage, because there'll definitely be a lot of calls.
Of course, yeah.
Look, it was tricky for any director of public prosecution that one of your suspects is the deputy president of the country. But it's been done elsewhere. Presidents have been sent to jail. There was a South Korean president that was sent to jail. I spoke about Zuma being sent to jail. Israel, I think, has a president that
Brazil?
is...
Lula?
Brazil, Lula... Now,
president.
Lula's issue was... should have been a Kenyan thing, because really that was a mixture of political persecution and abuse of the criminal justice system in Lula's case. But there have been cases, very genuine cases, of holding power to account by these institutions. So it needs people that can actually do that. And I very reluctantly, I wish to go this far, very reluctantly, that sometimes could the experience of DPP Nurdin Haji be the issue? Because you remember when he was being vetted for the position, one of the arguments was, you know, he's never been to a courtroom to prosecute any case. And yes, we've never, ever seen him in court. And you know, it's a very heavy office. It's an office that requires probably more experience than he has demonstrated, probably more calmness than he has demonstrated, because you can't have a DPP talking about goodwill, because that's you're walking out of your section, Article 157 of the Constitution. You are basically not paying attention to your mandate and job description, and some of those lapses will invite these questions about DPP Nurdin Haji's ability to be the person that Article 157 of the Constitution anticipated. And look, people can be very, very harsh, and for good reasons, because we have a very, very vibrant legal fraternity. When you just remember the Supreme Court presidential petition, it doesn't matter which side you're watching, whether it's the petitioners or the respondents. And you can see that we have a very, very strong legal fraternity.
Vibrant, yeah.
You can pick very good judges and go to, you can even go back to the BBI cases. You remember the Court of Appeal, you remember the High Court. Yeah. These are the legal minds that we have in this country. So I think we should have a frank conversation, especially about some of these institutions, so that they are peopled correctly. They are people with people who have that spine and the presence to actually carry that office. If you are, I saw Natembea talking about cowardice, and yes, cowardice can also be an aspect in the execution of some of these responsibilities. You have to be courageous. You have to also be committed to doing right. How do you enter into deals if that is what really happened?
Yeah.
And then how do you prosecute without evidence? Because what are you saying? I completely have nothing on my back in terms of evidence, nothing under my table. I have submitted nothing to court. And I say, oh, the media and the director of criminal investigation forced me. So I think because of what we see, and we know our legal fraternity is one of the strongest in the world, we should have frank discussions about the staffing of our serious officers. Whether you're talking about Chief Justice, Director of Public Prosecution, Attorney General, you know, they should be our best. And we have very, very many good people, very top world-class lawyers in this country that can sit there and see through everything. They don't need to read 157 or ask for, what do you call it, goodwill.
Goodwill.